Most buyers never tell you where you lost them. They sit through your demo, read your proposal, take your follow-up call, and then they go quiet. And somewhere in your sales process, that deal gets marked as lost to a competitor or no decision. But the truth is usually simpler, and it's harder to hear. The process broke down somewhere, and nobody on your team saw it coming, because your buyers have a seat at every meeting you will never be invited to. The outside seat sits in that seat. I'm Mike Tumulty, founder of Inside Now, where we go through your commercial funnel as a real buyer and tell you exactly what we find. I'm also the host of the Outside Seat podcast, where I bring that conversation to the people who can actually do something about it. Every week, two strands: the GTM leaders talking strategy, and then the unsung heroes talking reality. Brought to you by Flourish, the GTM talent partner that connects hiring, development, and performance in sales, in life. Now to today's show. Hello and welcome to this week's exciting episode of The Outside Seat. My name's Mike Tumulty, and today I've got Andy Baylor. Now, full disclosure, Andy and I have worked together. We were just reminiscing before we started this conversation, and I think we started working together around about 14 years ago. And the last time we spoke was around about 8-9 years ago. So, Andy, I'm really thrilled that you agreed to join us on today's episode. Why don't you give everybody just a little bit of a sense of the journey that you've been on? I mean, you started as a BDR, you spent 11 years at one of the world's best technology companies, and now you're a lead strategic accounts at Tanium. This is not luck, this is craft. You've built a phenomenal career for yourself. And I think for a lot of people that will listen to this, they will want to understand from you the journey that you've been on. And we can get into some of those questions. But to start off with, why don't you just give a little bit of a sense of who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, thanks so much for having me. Like I said before the show, I think you've got a great podcast and a great thing going with the outside seat. So I'm excited to be a part of this and to listen to it after the show. But just to give everybody a quick background, I started at ServiceNow around 2012. We had just gone public as a newly formed company. Although the company started in 2004, it took about 8 years or so to go public. And when I joined, I was employee number 1200. So I was early stage, again, just post IPO. And that's where you and I got to know each other a little bit more when you were a senior leader of the BDR organization in London. And I worked for Kevin Gerber, who was our leader in Waltham. And I spent 2 years as a BDR really, seeing buyers and accounts in different industries from really an introductory intro into sales level. So, cold calling, getting folks on the phone, sending out cold emails, trying to build trust with new prospective buyers. And I think from there, I really, launched my career into different roles at ServiceNow. I was a manager for 2 years of other BDRs. I was in partners and alliances with, Tony Beller and Rick Welther and that whole organization. And then from there, I went into direct sales where I worked for Nicole Kenny's organization and Matt Hebert within inside sales in Waltham, covering commercial accounts and had a ton of success. It was my first foray into closing deals, carrying a quota, and just really continued to up level my game in terms of the sales strategy and sales effectiveness. I went into solution sales for a year, selling our customer workflows and field service product at ServiceNow before transitioning out of the business to work at a ServiceNow partner, CDW. They actually are a very large value-added reseller of many, many different technologies and vendor relationships. But I learned what it's like to implement ServiceNow and to sell the implementation services from a consulting standpoint between 2023 and 2025. I had a brief stint at Atlassian, a global company based on the Agile framework. They make Jira software and Confluence software. That, needless to say, that didn't last as long as I would have liked, but I transitioned out of that role. Now I'm at Tanium. I'm a director of strategic accounts in the Northeast. I cover about 30 net new prospects for Tanium and I get to see full cycle, field sales, enterprise level accounts. It's really kind of magical in terms of how my journey's transitioned from all the way back in the day as a BDR to now where I'm a director of strategic accounts. And I thank people like you, Mike, who have been there for me in my career and have, led the growth and the change. As Craig Pratt, one of my mentors, said, you kind of have to send the elevator back down to folks that are just starting out in their career. So I appreciate you doing that for me for sure.
Of course, and the reality is I've said this on previous episodes, it's not my job to manage, it's to open doors for opportunity, and then it's for you to kick it off its hinges and make sure that you're ready and to step through, and you've certainly done that. If you look at the career that you've carved out for yourself, and I mean, you're still a young guy, and you're still I mean, if you look at the steps that you've made, starting as that BDR, moving into leadership, moving into partnerships, you've got all of these different hats that you've put on within that organization, and it's let's be honest about it. It's a phenomenal organization, service now, and there's a lot to learn within there. So to be able to wear those different hats and learn so much, what does a career look like to you on the inside of that one organization? And what does it teach you that maybe job hopping never could?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think in today's day and age, with everything moving so fast, you've got AI, large language models that are powering the next generation of the workforce. You've got opportunities to job hop between organizations. And the only thing I would say is that maybe the grass isn't always greener, outside of your current position. I mean, I happen to view myself as tremendously lucky where I started and came from, because I got to see the evolution of probably three different companies. It was a small to medium sized business when I got it to ServiceNow, 1,200 employees. It was probably more of a medium to large size business, when I was in the middle of my career in partners and alliances and inside sales. I've seen a lot.
No, that's awesome. You look at that organization, I think if my math serves me correctly, you're probably there for around 44 to 45 quarters. So there's different ways to measure your time there, right? So you've got, yeah, I was there for 11 years, or I was there for 11 sales kickoffs. It's like if
That's
you remember
crazy.
the very first sales kickoff down in San Diego and how many people were there versus how many people that the last sales kickoff that you went to. And I was only there for 4 years, and I remember there was maybe a couple of hundred people at the sales kickoff down in San Diego, just outside of San Diego, for my first one, and then the last one down in Arizona, and we had well over 1,000 people. And there's different ways to measure your time within an organization. 44, 45 quarters is one of those. So kudos to you on that journey. It's a really good journey. And to the fact that you trusted to take on those many hats, I think that's a testament to the work that you're actually doing within that organization. So well done.
Thank you. Yeah, it's cool to think about it that way. I actually, until you said 44 to 45 quarters, I never even stopped to count it. So that puts things in perspective, and much appreciated for sure.
Very good. So you started as a BDR. Um, what did that foundation give you as a sales professional that you still rely on today when you're a strategic director managing 13 or 14 enterprise accounts? What does the whether it's the skills or the attitude or the actual BDR role, what does that give you that you still rely on today?
I mean, I think the BDR role is probably like the most important role in a company. I think someone once said a business doesn't happen until somebody sells something or gets a buyer's attention. And I think the BDR seat is the only role in sales where your entire job is to earn someone's attention from a cold start. So you develop an instinct for what a buyer actually cares about in the first 30 seconds. And that's tremendously difficult, right? To build trust in 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, any track record or any momentum is either going to be won or lost in that first 30 seconds. And I think the rejection volume builds muscle. By the time you're running enterprise deals, you've already been told no about, 999 or 1,000 times, and you realize that it's not personal. I think a lot of AEs who skipped the BDR stage probably never learned that rejection is real and that it's a huge part of the game, and I think you understand the handoff from the inside out. When you're an AE who was once a BDR, you know what it costs to get a meeting. You treat pipeline a little bit differently, and then, you don't waste the hard work to get in the room. I'm still prospecting today, trying to get meetings, trying to set up appointments with customers. I'm sending FedEx mailers in my job. I'm recording Loom videos. So I think the work as a BDR never really ends. It just builds a foundation for how you're going to use that experience later in your career. I think, like I said before, it's the most important job in a company.
Yeah, very good. So when you moved through the BDR management, partnerships, AE, the solution sales role, um, and all of that was during your time at ServiceNow. Which of those transitions that you went through was the hardest, and why?
And I think IC to manager, quite frankly, because I was really young in my career. I was only 20, 4 years old, and Kevin and I think yourself tapped me on the shoulder to say, "Hey, I think you're ready to take on a leadership role." And it was such an honor, it was such an opportunity to learn about what it's like to manage people. But I think the challenge for me up front was that your wins are almost like borrowed. They happen through other people. Their habits and fears and motivations are what you're managing. So there's an identity shift that's hard to sort of fathom when you're in a management seat. And I think the temptation as a strong IC is to jump in and just do it yourself. But the discipline as a manager is to stay back, to coach, to provide guidance, perspective. And that's where a lot of great sellers kind of lose that that skill. You kind of become a mediocre manager because you want to do it yourself. You want to do something different that you're not used to a little bit as a manager. And I think going back to an IC after managing is also underrated as that's difficult. I mean, you have to shed the authority and earn trust through the output. Again, not the title. And so there's a lot of humility that goes with that as well.
No, that makes a ton of sense. If we switch gears just ever so slightly then, and we move to your most recent role at Tanium. So you're now the director of strategic accounts, which is a cybersecurity company operating at an enterprise level. What does strategic account management actually mean in practice at that level? Not just a job description or I have this metric and that metric, but what does it actually mean for you at Tanium?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the title can be a little misleading too, because some folks see our director of strategic accounts title and think that we're actually managing people. I actually report to an RVP, who reports to an AVP, and they're the actual managers of people. I'm not managing anyone. I'm really orchestrating and running a team of folks around me. But the goal is sales. It's to orchestrate the SC, solution engineer, the value engineer, the deal desk team, partners, customer success. And these folks don't report to me, but my job is to make the right people show up at the right moment in the buyer's process. So, at Tanium specifically, it's a real kind of high stakes thing we're in right now because of mythos and because of security vulnerabilities and the increased threat level from outside attackers. And my job is to get buyers interested, but do so in a way that sort of gets them thinking about how to lock down their organization, not miss a vulnerability that could potentially lead to a breach or a ransomware event or a front page news story. And so my job is to be kind of that calm, credible presence in their environment, someone who helps them make better decisions. And we interact with CISOs, VPs of IT security, we interact with CTOs, CIOs, and like you said before the call, Mike, I think a lot of times a person will call and be interested in something that Tanium has to offer, but what I'm finding is that there's layers and layers and layers after that that we really have to unravel to get to the root cause of what's really going on in an organization. And enterprise buyers, I might be getting into a little bit ahead of myself with this next part, but enterprise buyers in cybersecurity are making decisions in complex ways. So I'm happy to get into that as we move forward. But it's a really interesting role, and I'm lucky to be in the seat that I'm in today.
Yeah, and we'll certainly get into that because I'm really interested. Hence the name of the podcast, The Outside Seat, is what is the buyer's perspective, the buyer's experience, the buyer's journey when it comes to that enterprise buyer and where the differences are within cybersecurity versus what you were doing with CDW, what you were doing back in the days with ServiceNow. So, what does the buying process actually look like from where you sit, and what do most sellers? In fact, I'll get back to what do most sellers misread, but what does that actually look like to you from a somebody's built this career for themselves when it comes to the buyer's journey?
I think it's super interesting. I think I learned this at ServiceNow firsthand when we implemented value selling, and we started to think about how we need to be multi-threaded in our sales process because we have to match sort of the energy. Like sales is a transfer of energy, and I think buyers are running a political process internally. They're trying to build consensus. They're managing skeptics. They're justifying spend to a board that doesn't want to hear about security until something kind of breaks or goes wrong. And I think my job is to understand that internal motion, not just my own sales motion. I think the people that really do well in this role, they're able to pull people along on a journey and build kind of multi-threaded stakeholder consensus. So cybersecurity is high stakes. I mean, the the fear is real, but CISOs don't buy on fear. They're surrounded by fear messaging every day. They really buy on trust and proof. And I think the seller who wins is the one who shows up with a specific credible answer to a problem that they either know they have, or if they don't know they have, they're going to find out soon enough. So I think that's really my takeaway is that you have to build multi-threaded consensus. You have to match the buyer where they're at. You have to help empower them to go get economic and executive buy-in from higher level people. So it's really a level 200 or level 300 approach where you're not just asking for a meeting anymore. You're asking for somebody to really take on the responsibility of selling your product and your vision internally at the organization, if you will.
So you've been on both sides. In fact, one let's go back because what I said is what do most what do most sellers consistently misread when it comes to that buyer's process? And obviously, you've been in a leadership role previously. You've been in partnerships. You've been within CDW where you're looking at. I mean, there's a ton of people around you who are all selling. But when you're not looking at the buyer's journey as a process, what do most sellers consistently misread about that in your experience?
I think there's a few things. I think in some cases you can misread silence as progress. So a buyer who stops pushing back, for example, may not necessarily be bought in. They're kind of headed the different direction where they're actually waiting to say no internally. I think you have to think that everybody's going to go towards a no eventually, right? So you have to manufacture the friction yourself by asking the hard questions about economic justification, internal skeptics, and what happens if they don't move. There's a person that jumps on one of our calls recently with a prospective buyer who was in value management. And what I learned from this person, Colin, was that you have to ask the tough questions. You have to sort of create a pain map for how quantify the pain. How bad is it across the organization? How manual? How friction? How much friction is there in an organization? How archaic is their process? In order to get to the let's move the deal forward, you can't just skip steps and go right into sort of the let's get this thing wrapped up and signed. There's so much that goes into that pain map exercise. There's so much that goes into, um, like I said, stakeholder alignment. And I think, you have to almost assume that unless you push them along and challenge them, great book is Challenger Sale, it's going to lead to a no. Either time's going to kill the deal, somebody internally, a naysayer is going to kill the deal, or something's going to happen that's not going to perfectly align your deal. So I think you kind of have to be this maniacal sort of skeptic of understanding where the buyer's at, because they have a hard time figuring out how they can buy this software as well. They've got a problem, and it might be a bit, a technical problem, but is it really a business problem? Is it really a business large scale issue that they're dealing with that they need to solve immediately? So I think those are some things you have to think about along the way. And I think the people that miss it are just sort of waiting and sitting back and saying, "Oh, like I'm hopeful that this is going to get done," or "I think we're on the right track." Well, those things don't really translate in sales. You have to be just maniacally focused on, if Mike says no, how do I get Mike, convinced to turn into a yes, and how do I get his buying committee to commit to this, and how do I get the CFO lined up and the CTO lined up? So there's so many things you have to do in a deal before it gets done.
Yeah, there's a lot of gold in there, to be fair, of what you've just said. So when they stop pushing back and silence has been interpreted as this is going well, the reality is that's the start of the ghosting phase. That's the start potentially of they're just backing away from that process because you've missed something. You've not addressed a particular pain. You've not mapped the organization correctly. You don't understand where the power of no is. Somebody else within that organization might have said, you can't do this. And rather than tell you that we can't do it for this reason, they just silence and start to back away. So it's really important that you're really invested in finding out more about that business. And that's where I think some of those BDR skills that you've developed over many years is really important, because what you can then do is spread yourself across that organization, try and speak to multiple different stakeholders within that organization. And I think some of the skill sets that you're using today is like a short video to somebody, just keeping you in the loop of this is where we are within this process, a touch point, and letting them know that we've not forgotten about you. You're part of this whole conversation. I think it's really important to keep everybody invested across that. So I think that's really important. The other thing that you mentioned in there was I use this a lot when people talk about hope. Hope is not a forecast category. It's
Nope.
also not a sound sales strategy. Hope from time to time, it will come in. It's just like sometimes I hope that the number 10 black in a casino lands, and it will sometimes, but more often than not, it won't. And the one time it does not make up for the other times that it does not. So hope is not a strategy. You need to make sure that you are in control. And by being in control, it's not taking over the whole process. It is taking control by being a good confidant is probably the wrong word, but somebody that's actually listening to that organization and taking them on the journey that addresses the pains and the problems that they have, not the process that you need to follow. Because that's where, unfortunately, a lot of deals are lost, is because I've got to follow my sales process. I've got stage one, stage two, stage three, and there might be six, seven, eight stages within your sales process. But your customer is back over here in stage two because you've missed something within that discovery phase that you might have within your organization. So it's really important that you take that buyer on a journey and ensure that you're embedded within the journey that the buyer is actually on. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah, and I just switched audio, so hopefully it's still coming through loud and clear. But that makes 100% sense. I think the most underrated sales development skill is gaining a leverage with a champion. I think having a champion that you can count on and trust to help you navigate the organization, I think, is the most underrated thing. Like having that person on text, having that person, you can call up and say, "Hey, this is stuck. Can you help me get this unstuck?" I think that's an underrated thing. And then I think also why, I mean, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think why enterprise salespeople are so highly paid is that it takes so much effort to go do what we do, because we're navigating through an organization that we don't work at, that, we have to basically picture ourselves as a badged employee of that organization. going kind of behind the scenes and solving a complex problem, and we're representing another company's product at the same time. So I think there's just a lot that goes into it, and hopefully I hit on some of those key things so far. But I'm still learning. I mean, if I were to say that I have all the answers now, I'd be lying. I think every day I'm learning something new, whether it's how to use AI, whether it's how to navigate a complex cycle, whether it's industry specific terminology. So it's a continual evolution and a continual learning
Yeah.
process as
Uh,
well.
100%. And if I look at, I've used this analogy before in social media posts and maybe in sales kickoffs and trainings that I've given. You look at Roger Federer. Roger Federer had a coach on his first day as a professional player and his last day as a professional player. Now, a coach is not going to teach Roger Federer how to hit a backhand or a forehand or a lob or a smash or a serve. They're just not. But there are incremental changes that are happening all of the time to the game of tennis. And his coach is helping him overcome those. So looking at your competitor, how do we deal with how a competitor attaches himself to that game, and how do they what are they going to do? How are they going to approach that game? And understanding that is really important. And that's the role of a coach. And that's why continuous improvement, whether it's from self help books, from training, from different methodologies, you've mentioned Challenger Sale, there are other methodologies available, but learning all of the time. Because if you've got the world's greatest tennis player who's being coached on his last day as as a professional player, it tells you that coaching is making a difference. So it's really important that people take that away as a little bit of a snippet. Okay, we need to coach. We need to always learn. We need to continuously develop, because if Roger Federer can do it on his last day as a professional player, there's no reason why me as a entry level person within sales or someone that's got 10 years or 20 years cannot learn, because there's I mean, we look at AI over the last 2, 3, 4 years and the evolution of what AI can do to support you and augment what you're doing as a seller. You have to learn this. You have to develop your skill sets. You have to be able to adapt. Even if you're a 25, 35-year veteran of an enterprise seller, your customers are thinking about AI. Therefore, you need to think about AI. And the way to do that is to learn it and it's to develop yourself. So you mentioned it, and I think it's really important that people take that away of continuous development.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, no, well said, Mike. I think there's a lot of gold in what you said as well.
I think I also enjoyed the terminology, and I've not heard it before, or maybe I have, but it's never really stuck until you said it then, is going into an organization like a badged employee.
Yeah.
Um, as a consultant, that's literally what I do. I go into an organization, maybe as a fractional leader here and a fractional leader there, and I'm a badged employee for the period of time that I'm there supporting that organization. But looking at it from an enterprise seller, if you have that mindset, it's very different to I'm trying to sell to you. We all know, and the customer knows you're trying to sell to us, but you're navigating within that organization to try and uncover the real problems, the real pains, and then be able to provide the solutions to address those. And the solutions from a value-based perspective are fundamental. And that value can be derived in multiple ways, right? So you've got, are you making money for me? Are you reducing risk within my business? Are you um, saving me costs? Are you saving me time? Is it a business value driver or is it a personal value driver? Are you going to make me look good or are you going to make me look bad? But the technology is good. There's so many things that you need to be able to balance and navigate within all of those organizations. So I really like the terminology of the badged employee. I've never thought about it, even though that's what I do. So
Yeah.
thanks for sharing
It's
that.
yeah, and it's changed a little bit too, right? I mean, with post COVID, with decentralizing organizations and moving companies, more spread out. Maybe the experience has changed a little bit too, where if you can get an on-site meeting with someone and get badged in for multiple meetings or multiple executive stakeholder alignment meetings, then you've just up leveled yourself amongst your peers where they might be trying to sell something over Zoom that if you can get in person and really, again, sales is a transfer of energy, really get in front of the buying committee and get in front of the people. It's people buy from people. They don't buy over Zoom or over, Teams. I mean, I think for the last 6 years, we've been operating in this kind of decentralized world and not every customer is in the same place. I get all that. But I think also the more you can get in person, the better for sure.
Excellent. Well, one of the traditions that we have on the Outside Seat podcast is we do a rapid fire 5 questions where I ask you the same questions I ask all of our guests. And um, what we'll try and do is maybe dig into one of the answers to just to expand on it a little bit when we get to the end. So for the rapid fire, what's that one tool in your GTM stack that you cannot live without?
So I didn't use it until my job at Tanium, but it's Notion. It's where strategy becomes execution for me. It has account plans, activity tracking, deal briefs all in one place, and then I can layer in they have their own AI layer embedded in there, but I can also embed Claude as well. So it's really got my whole worldview of how I go about my business, which has been awesome.
And maybe we'll circle back to that one in a second because that's really interesting. I've not you obviously I've used Notion, but not necessarily for the way that you just described it. So it'd be good to understand that in a moment. What's the biggest GTM myth that you would like to kill off today?
I think there's a myth out there that pipeline coverage solves everything. Like if you can just get to 2x or 3x coverage, it means that you've covered yourself for the rest of the year. I think if we drill into that a little bit and start to unravel, not all pipeline is created equal. I think some of these deals might be single threaded. They might be stuck at the wrong stage. So I think about leadership thinking about quantity over quality. I think it's really about quality pipeline. I'd rather have 1.5x very quality pipeline that I know is going to close than having 3x unqualified pipeline.
Yeah, it's a really good. It's sometimes it can be seen as a vanity metric. Is that we have 3, 4, 5x coverage, but then when you really look at it, there could be 1 or 2 whales, as we call them, within that number, which is artificial in terms of the coverage, because if that one deal goes away, and the reality is in a lot of organizations, a 35% win rate is actually considered really good. So what that tells you is 2 of the 3 of those deals are not gonna happen for whatever reason. So if you have a whale in there, a very large deal, and that shows your pipeline coverage is 2x, 3x, you take that out, what happens to your coverage? Now, I know a lot of organizations look at those kind of things, but you'd be amazed at the amount of times that they don't. And I was having a conversation with somebody this morning, and we were talking about pipeline coverage and what does that look like and how many whales are in there and how much of that is segmented in the right way. And it's I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. That's that's concerning that people are driving for this metric of 3x and thinking, okay, as long as I get 3x, we're going to make it. And there is some uh, analytics within an organization which says 3x, I'm going to get there based on historicals. But like you said, having real clean pipeline, which you know is going to close, is also a really important metric. But you can only get to that through trust. So through delivering against your number, even if it's 1.5. And what tends to happen is if you start to miss a number in a quarter, then that's when that metric becomes even more important. So it's an interesting metric, but I'm glad you killed that off as a silver arrow or a golden bullet because it's certainly not. It's one metric. When we talk about metrics, then question 3, what's that one metric that you look at first thing on a Monday morning?
So this one is one that goes back to the BDR days. It's something that'll stick with me probably forever. It's outbound activity from the prior week. So actual contacts made. I think that's the leading indicator because and we can reach buyers in different ways. We can send emails, we can make calls, we can send Loom videos, we can send LinkedIn messages, but I think all of that all of those connections that are actual meeting acceptance, I think is the real indicator of what's to come next, which is the pipeline. I think you can measure it a little bit more streamlined. So I check outbound activity from last week and back to the BDR days. I mean, we used to get paid on meetings accepted or meetings converted. I think when Ralph got into the leadership position after you left, I think there was a debate about does the opportunity have to make it through a certain stage, but and we could probably have a whole separate podcast on that whole debate, but but I think it's really outbound activity from the prior week is the metric I look at.
No, it's a really important metric, and what I find is those people that have started their journey as a BDR and they are super successful as a BDR and they make their way and they get to an enterprise level, if they keep that ethos around outbound and keep that activity metric like forefront of mind, then it sets you up really strongly within that role. It's not the because you've already articulated that there's so much to an enterprise account executive and a strategic account director. There's so much that you need to learn. There's so much you need to know about an organization. But the one skill that you've developed over the years, what I see time and time again is people come out of that BDR role and think, right, oh, I've made it. I no longer need to worry about outbound because I've got a BDR who's going to do it for me. It's like, why would you give up that skill?
For sure. Yeah, 100% agree with you there. And it just goes to show that if you don't lose the skill if you've gone from a BDR to AE, don't rely upon another BDR to go fill your pipeline for you. You have to take control and do it yourself for sure.
Cool. Um, This is supposed to be rapid fire, and I've gone off on tangents with all of these questions because it's super interesting, but we've still got two more. So I use this question because, as you can see behind me, I've got knocking the microphone. I've got a number of books, and there's some of those books that are there which I go back to time and time again. So if we look at the BDR days, there was a fantastic book written by Trish Bertruzzi, um, which I go back to time and time again because a lot of the things that are in there are still relevant today than they were when they were written and developed. Must be 15 years ago.
Mhm.
And another one is Start With Why. It's a book that I've given out well over 100 times to salespeople during my career. What's that one GTM or self-help book that you always return to?
So I mentioned it at the beginning of the show, but I'll say it again. It's really the challenger sale. I think every time I drift towards being too accommodating in a deal, I think pulling this book up and saying, I need to take control. I need to challenge my customers to think differently. I think keeps me a little bit more grounded. And I'll tell you where it comes from. Like, too, we did this Enneagram test as part of my sales coaching program with Untap Your Sales Potential, and my coach and I reviewed it. And it turns out I'm a type 2 helper persona. I'm not a challenger persona. So the challenger is really the opposite of where I'm at as a human. So anchoring in the challenger sale, I think helps me pull that part of the sales process out of the book and kind of brings it into the cycle a little bit because it's so true. If you're sort of nice to everybody and you're helpful and accommodating, that's not the personality trait that's going to get deals done. You have to take some control back and teach and really tailor your messaging to your customers.
Yeah, it's really, really insightful. If you look at some of those personality traits, like type 2 in this example, I use this analogy because people will ask me if I'm meeting somebody and they'll talk about where are your strengths and what areas are gaps for you. And I always say this, despite launching a podcast and speaking to lots of people, I'm not a social butterfly at all. You put me in a room with 20 people and say, go and network. I'm like, scream. All the voices are going off in my head saying, no. You put me in a room with 2,000 people sat in front of me and I'm presenting to them, not a problem. Happy to do that because I'm in control of that. So it's, but I have to network. I have to. And the reason why I mention it is if you know that that's an area, you've mentioned it with Challenger Cell, you know it's an area that you need to challenge yourself to overcome that. And similar to what I have to do within those social type scenarios, it's like, okay, I need to get over myself and I need to engage and I need to have the conversation. And even if it's something as silly as talking about football to break the ice or whatever it is, it's really important to do that. So again, thanks for the answer on that one. Really insightful. Final question: who is the most underrated person in your professional network that really more people should know about?
So I had to take a long kind of pause on this. I'm kind of putting him on the spot because he's I think he's not on LinkedIn as much or on social as much, but our AVP at Tanium, Sean Penrice, he came from App Dynamics, which was acquired by Cisco. He's been an AVP at Tanium for about a year now. I think he's really helped me shape my style a little bit. We've only been working together for a month or two, but I think in doing deal reviews with Sean, and I think understanding, his style and his leadership approach, I think he's the most underrated person for me right now because he wouldn't go out and post this on social media, but I think he's a really strong leader and an effective leader at what he does, and we're currently looking for a new RVP to be between myself and Sean. If anybody is out there looking for a new gig in the Northeast region for enterprise sales. So just give a quick shout out there.
There's so much I've learned today from you, Andy. I know we've known each other for quite a number of years, and we've not really been in touch for the last few years. But I'm going to correct that because this has been a really insightful conversation. There's so much that you've done within your career. You're continually learning, you're continually developing, you're trying to overcome obstacles consciously, and you've taught me some new things today. So if you've taught me new things, I'm sure you've taught a number of people within our audience a few things as well about not only the journey and the companies that you've worked for, but a little bit about how to navigate those companies and carve out what has been a really great career for yourself to date. I, I I said it before the episode started, and maybe when we were talking, but you're still a young guy. You've still got a long period in front of you, and if the past is anything to guide the future, you're in for a phenomenal career. So I'm proud to know you. I'm proud to have worked with you. And I'm really proud that you're one of the first people to put their hands up and say, Mike, I'd love to come and speak to your audience about the journey that I've been on. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, great to be with you. And thanks again.
Your buyers are still sitting in that outside seat. Subscribe on YouTube, follow on Apple or Spotify, drop a like and a follow. It genuinely means the world as we keep growing this channel. And if today's conversation sparked a question or a thought, leave it in the comments. Every month I answer your questions in a dedicated episode, and the best ones might just end up on Instagram, LinkedIn or TikTok. Your question could be the next conversation that we have. This episode was brought to you by Flourish. Find them at helloflourish.com. We'll see you next time with a brand new guest in the outside seat.